Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Russian aggression against Ukraine should never have broken out. There is only one man to blame for this conflict, and that man is Vladimir Putin. No doubt about it. The Russian dictator is to blame for the unimaginable scale of suffering and destruction that has struck the Ukrainian people. That is a simple fact, despite what Russian propaganda may say about NATO expansion and other such nonsense. Although Ukraine is bravely fending off aggressor attacks, time is not playing in its favor. For this reason, among others, President Zelenskyy went to the US to negotiate and present his victory plan. And words do matter here. A victory plan, not simply a peace plan. Despite the extraordinary motivation of the soldiers and the existing Western support, Ukraine must end this war. But also, it must ensure it is not sacrificed on the altar of global politics. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy sees the autumn as a decisive phase in the confrontation. That is why he is meeting with his allies and holding a flurry of meetings and talks at UN sidelines. Both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will listen to Zelensky's proposal for victory this week. If all goes according to plan, then a meeting between Zelenskyy and Donald Trump will also take place. So, what is next for Ukraine and its efforts to push for victory, despite some politicians in the West probably being more willing to settle for a less than advantageous deal with Putin's Russia? Well, today we will try to find out.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to unveil his plan for victory during his visit to the United States this week. He announced the plan in a video published before leaving for the U.S.
The coming week could be crucial in many ways for stopping Russian terror, this aggression, and for restoring normal security. For this to happen, the decisiveness of our partners must match the courage of Ukrainians. The answer to the question when will this war end is actually in when the partners' resolve will not lag behind. Ukraine must win this war. It can win, but it must do so together with the whole world. Our clear strategy will be on the table of our partners, on the table of the President of the United States.
Not much is currently known about Zelenskyy's plan, but the president said it includes several key points: further weapons donations, diplomatic efforts to force Russia into peace, and holding Moscow accountable for its invasion of Ukraine. It also addresses the need for easing restrictions on the use of long-range missiles, which Ukraine argues are essential for striking the sites from which Russia launches its attacks. This footage shows the aftermath of a recent Ukrainian drone strike on Russian missile stockpiles. President Biden has yet to make a decision on the matter. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that such strikes would be considered direct participation by NATO in the war.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Despite recent successes in the Kursk region and the spectacular destruction of a strategic arms depot in Russia, Ukraine is on the defensive. That is why the upcoming talks are so important. Without putting a stop to the war, the suffering of the civilians will continue. With autumn and winter approaching, experts say that Russia will intensify its efforts to make the lives of Ukrainian civilians even more unbearable, as if they haven't suffered enough already. And let's be real, if Russia can deliver on anything, it is more violence and more war crimes. The main goal of President Zelenskyy is to press President Biden for binding security guarantees while he is still in office. Lifting restrictions on long-range strikes, NATO membership, more aid, all this is on the table, according to reports. The urgency of the matter is such that there is a reasonable risk that the position of the United States on assistance to Ukraine will change after the elections. This can be inferred from the statements of Donald Trump and his vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. One thing is certain, despite the possible change in the White House, Ukraine will still be able to count on its allies in Europe. Partners such as France, Germany and Poland remain crucial. But in order to keep options open, Ukraine also needs to look beyond traditional alliances. It is here that the global south comes into view, with countries like Brazil, China and India looming large when it comes to a potential peace process. To give you an example, Kiev sees India as a possible negotiation broker. President Zelensky's recent talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi are a part of this strategy, a reminder that his Washington visit is one of the many facets of Kiev's strategy, albeit a vital one. For the time being, the diplomatic puzzle remains incomplete. But with his latest effort to convince both current and prospective US leadership to back his cause even further, President Zelensky is hoping to gradually push the scattered pieces into place. And now, here to shed more light on this story, we are joined by Chris Morris, Fellow of the School of Strategy, Marketing and Innovation at the University of Portsmouth. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So President Zelensky has arrived in the United States. First off, he visited a munitions factory. Would you say that this is somewhat symbolic of what Ukraine may want to achieve?
Naturally. Now, a key aspect of the Ukrainian plan at the moment is ensuring that there is that steady supply of Western support and that steady supply of Western arms. Now, one of the things that they are struggling on the front lines at the moment is that supply of arms. So really committing to that relationship and ensuring that, the weapon systems continue to flow is an absolutely central part of what is going on in Ukraine at the moment. So it's fundamentally unsurprising that a symbolic visit of this nature would be made.
So he also made a powerful quote saying that there is about 400 employees at that factory, but they have actually saved millions of Ukrainians. So this is a high point of the visit, no doubt, because it sets the tone for what is to come. But do you think that this is going to be a success? We've spoken about weapons. We know that the current administration has imposed restrictions on Ukraine in its use of long-range weapons. Do you think that President Zelensky will be successful in finally persuading President Biden to lift these restrictions?
I think that Zelensky is facing a tough sell at the moment, particularly when it comes to increasing the utility of the arms that he has provided. So yes, he is adamant that he wants to be able to use long-range weapons within Russia. Now, whilst this would be an incredibly significant tactical gesture, it would change the face of the conflict. Strategically, it's not going to shift the overall balance. And again, one of the things that the West is particularly mindful of at the moment is provoking any escalation in the conflict and indeed, provoking Russia further. So in terms of getting, I suppose, that adamant statement from the US that these weapon systems are now free fire, I think that's not going to be forthcoming in this visit, unless Zelensky is, particularly surprisingly persuasive on the matter.
Wouldn't you say that the so-called escalation school of thought on the Ukrainian war is actually a bit outdated right now? Russia has often said, look, if you send tanks, this will be escalation. It's a red line. If you send fighter jets, this will definitely be an escalation. And no doubt crossing this red line will result in something unspeakable happening. Well, later on, to reiterate a popular meme, well, crickets. Nothing. Russia has not really done anything in response to this. So why do you think long-range missiles, in particular, used against the same kind of targets that Ukraine is already attacking using drones, would make any difference?
You make a very compelling point there. And absolutely, Russian red lines have previously been crossed and have previously been trampled on many times in terms of the weapon systems provided and the level of Western support. Now, the one thing that would perhaps hold me back on the long-range weapon systems would be that up until this juncture, and indeed since 2014, the way that Russia fundamentally views this conflict is that it is a Russian civil war. Now, really committing further or changing how we use Western weapon systems, it may actually constitute a change in how Russia perceives this conflict. So again, on the one hand, yes, we have repeatedly called Putin's bluff before on his nuclear threats and indeed some of the more, I suppose, nebulous threats that he's made against Western backers. But on the other hand, again, it's the level to which, I suppose, the West wants to compromise their own interests and indeed provoke a Russian response. So I think it's still a valid consideration.
So we've covered the Democrats' side. Now let's take a look at the Republicans, because this is where it gets interesting. There's no confirmation yet whether there is going to be a meeting between Trump and Zelensky. But President Zelensky did make a few scathing remarks concerning the so-called J.D. Vance plan, or perhaps we should call it a sketch of a plan, a vague outline. But still, this actually was an interview that J.D. Vance has given recently, and he said Ukraine may have to agree to lose some of its territory. There might have to be a DMZ imposed on the line of contact, i.e. meaning Russia keeps what it has taken, but also no NATO membership. President Zelensky said this is way too radical. He doesn't actually view this as the official plan. So do you think the conversation with President Trump might go well, if it happens at all? And also, would you say that the J.D. Vance statement is the only strategy that the Republicans have? Or perhaps President Trump might actually say, no, this wasn't actually my plan at all. I did not endorse it. He did not deny that this is the case, but neither did he say, yeah, listen to J.D. Vance. He said it all.
Yes. Now, the Republicans have been fairly light on details. Trump in particular, if we remember famously, he stated that he would end the war in 48 hours upon being elected. Again, he's not really elaborated many details. I think J.D. Vance's, I suppose, rather vaguely articulated plan, which involves capitulating territory, again, is just the latest permutation of this. Now, in terms of what this might actually mean, it means that any kind of Republican success is going to be of major concern to Ukraine. I would not say that at the moment the Republican side has anything close to a concrete plan for resolving this conflict. But some of the things they are suggesting, like capitulating territory, whilst there's not really, there's no solid basis for this or to suggest that this might work, what they do have is a keen grasp of the temperature of both, the US electorate and indeed many other world leaders around the world that are increasingly fatigued over the nature of this conflict.
How do you think this conversation could play out? In a recent interview, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said that we are ready to talk to both a prospective Republican administration and a Democrat administration. It's just that with the Democrats, we talk about values, we talk about shared interests. With the Republicans, it's more about he didn't say business, but it was basically just, less about international law, less about principles, more about specific interests of individual countries. So different strategies. Do you think the same approach should be used by President Zelensky? That Zelensky should not say, look, this would be contrary to international law to keep Russia territories. Instead, he might actually appeal to Trump's business sense, saying it would be a bad deal because you are plunging the US into an era of uncertainty and you'll be losing out. And also, your arms industry would have a lot to gain on the, that sort of thing. Would you say that this perhaps could be the key?
Yes, absolutely. So the plan that Zelensky has currently entered the US with, when he talks about victory now, he talks about justice. Again, this values-driven approach is something that's going to be far more compelling, I suppose, to the Democratic side. But yes, Trump and the Republicans, far more business-focused. Now, fortunately, I suppose Ukraine does have something to offer from a business point of view, both, reinvigorating the US Rust Belt through increased arms production. And of course, they are confronting one of the US's major adversaries for pennies on the dollar versus the US doing it itself. So I think there is a robust, business and realist argument that Ukraine could be making as well here. Perhaps that is something that Trump might get on board with. But again, he is a bit of a wild card, and I certainly wouldn't be holding my breath.
So how successful do you think this is going to be in the long run? I mean, the plan will be presented, but what will be the ultimate results? We had a very interesting interview by the Czech President Petr Pavel quite recently. He basically said Ukraine should be realistic. It is likely that it will lose territory to Russia. This territory will be occupied. This has happened in the past. Do such statements reinforce Ukraine's position, or do they weaken it?
That's certainly not good that we're seeing this shift in the tides with world leaders issuing statements that they want to effectively reach a peace on this as soon as possible. So that is absolutely a valid consideration. Now, one of the interesting aspects of this, I suppose, is the building fatigue and, again, the real reluctance to continue fighting what has been an incredibly costly war, both in human lives and equipment. A lot of people now want to see this war come to an end. Now, it's not good for the Ukrainians, no doubt there. One of the key considerations that we're not considering as well is the Russian position in this conflict. Now, even if Ukraine was, by its Western backers, to be brought to the bargaining table, there's no guarantee that Putin is going to be there waiting. And even if he was, is he going to be a reliable stakeholder in any peace settlement that we could reach? Now, there's a major
Probably
risk
unlikely,
if we do,
given the historical
unlikely.
example, the Budapest Memorandum, for example, guaranteed by
Yes.
Russia, broken by Russia.
Yeah, so that's a key concern as well. But again, there is, like I say, there is a palpable fatigue and there is a building concern with how long this war is going on and how costly it has been. So again, it's not great for the Ukrainian position, no doubt. But, on the other hand, this war cannot continue going on indefinitely. Sooner or later, there is going to have to be a juncture where we do consider these questions. And world leaders seem to be pushing for that.
What about the cost-benefit analysis? You said that many countries and leaders say this is an expensive war. The counter-argument, a very compelling one given by the Ukrainians but also by many leaders in Central and Eastern Europe, is that, look, if there is a broader conflict or even any sort of challenge to NATO's position in the region following Ukraine's defeat, this is going to be more expensive, even containing Russia. If it takes away lots of Ukrainian territories, becomes reinforced and emboldened, that would be expensive too. So perhaps this is the sort of cost that has to be borne, regardless of the fact that, our societies might not initially think that this is something they want to do.
Naturally, yes. It seems that, again, when you take into account what is happening elsewhere in the world with, events in the Middle East, it looks like we're heading into a very perilous era of world history. Now, for a nation like, big backer nations like the US, for instance, they are going to have to very carefully weigh this decision. What kind of a message do they want to be sending in 2024? Because it could have ramifications down the line. And again, being strong on Ukraine could reap benefits.
Such as, for example, in relation to China, which quite certainly is looking at this and thinking, what are they going to do? So if they actually prove to be less than confident with their handling of the conflict in Ukraine, any sort of incursion into Taiwan might actually yield a similar result. So, of course, there are many unanswered questions there. We know that President Zelensky will try to present his case as best as he can. Within the next couple of days, more answers are likely to be forthcoming. For the time being, Chris Morris was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Israel has launched more attacks on Lebanon after the previous wave of missiles resulted in the deaths of at least 500 people. The strikes, the deadliest in the cross-border conflict in 2 decades, have prompted urgent calls for de-escalation from the United Nations and world leaders.
Lebanon is ablaze. In a video message, the Israeli army said it had struck more than 1,300 Hezbollah targets across the country, almost all of which were supposedly located in residential areas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged Lebanese civilians to evacuate areas targeted by the IDF, emphasizing that Israel's conflict is with Hezbollah, not the Lebanese people. But supposedly almost 500 were killed, and a further 1,600 wounded. In retaliation, Hezbollah launched hundreds of rockets into Israel, almost all of which were intercepted. This video shows the famous Iron Dome at work. Netanyahu's stated aim has been that he wants to get Israelis back into their homes in northern Israel, and military pressure may bring Hezbollah leader Nasrallah back to the negotiating table.
The UN General Assembly has adopted the Pact for the Future, a comprehensive agreement aimed at addressing the world's most pressing challenges. The pact, approved during the opening of the 2-day Summit for the Future, seeks to tackle issues ranging from climate change and artificial intelligence to escalating conflicts and increasing inequality.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres emphasized the urgency of the pact, highlighting the rising catastrophic and existential risks facing the world. The 42-page document outlines 56 actions designed to improve the lives of over 8 billion people globally, However, Guterres acknowledged the difficulties ahead, noting that financial shortcomings, animosities, and inequalities among member states could hinder the pact's implementation. The agreement received overwhelming support, with 143 countries voting in favor and only 6 opposing. Notably, Russia's proposed amendment to weaken the pact was rejected by a significant majority. As the summit continues, world leaders are expected to discuss the pact's implementation and the broader challenges facing the international community.
The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has announced that its military forces are now detecting 12,000 enemy targets weekly with the help of artificial intelligence. This breakthrough is attributed to the Avengers AI platform developed by the ministry's Innovation Center.
As it turns out, AI is helping Ukraine's troops fight Russia. The Avengers platform utilizes automatic video analysis from drones and fixed cameras to identify enemy vehicles and equipment. This technology enables operators to make faster and more efficient decisions, significantly reducing the risk of errors due to fatigue. Kateryna Chernohorenko, Deputy Minister of Defense for Digital Development, highlighted the platform's unparalleled capability in processing video data of enemy equipment. She emphasized the ongoing efforts to enhance the platform's cloud capabilities and integrate AI solutions with drone systems to maintain a competitive edge. The AI model continues to be trained on new data, improving its ability to detect various types of enemy vehicles, even in challenging environments such as camouflaged tanks in forests or infantry fighting vehicles on dirt roads.
Russia is set to introduce criminal penalties for Russophobia, targeting discrimination against Russian citizens and residents by foreigners. The draft law, approved by the cabinet, includes provisions for trials in absentia and aims to address perceived anti-Russian sentiments amid ongoing geopolitical tensions.
Russian authorities have announced plans to amend the criminal code to include penalties for Russophobia. The proposed penalties include barring convicted individuals from holding certain posts or conducting specific activities in Russia. However, the government noted that this punishment might be ineffective for individuals residing outside Russia. The move comes amid ongoing tensions following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Russian officials have frequently accused Western countries of Russophobia, citing sanctions and other measures as discriminatory. The draft law does not specify what constitutes discrimination against Russian citizens, leaving room for interpretation. Critics argue that this could be used to target dissent and justify actions against perceived enemies of the state.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.